Hello and welcome to Identity Office Hours. I'm your host, Mike Schwartz, founder of Glue. Today is episode 199. Quick logistical reminder to follow Identity Office Hours on LinkedIn or YouTube. The topic today is, oh man, I have the wrong topic up, so I'm just going to post it here. So we're saying, what is the GovOps ACC? So every 15 or 20 episodes or so now, I'm putting in an episode about GovOps. So this is it. This is our day to talk about GovOps. As you can see, the co-host today is Rohit Kare. Welcome, Rohit.
Good morning.
And so today's your 11th appearance on IOH. So congratulations. You're by far and away. We're actually giving you honorary co-host at this point because you've been on so much.
Double digits. I mean, pretty soon I'll be aging faster than my kids. Thank you so much for your faith and time. And it's always been a wonderful experience here. And I hope we'll see more new faces here with us soon.
So I'm announcing your title. Normally I go with Identity at Large. But today I'm going with proposed co-chair of the proposed GovOps technical initiative in the Orbit work group of the OpenSSF.
I feel like, royalty there. No, and the long titles. I think the key is let's take it apart for people, along with things like being an advocate for GovOps and salesperson on the scene here in Silicon Valley while you're out in Austin. The idea of there being a open source security foundation, the OpenSSF's Orbit working group. We're trying to propose creating a group within that. You've done a lot of the lead work on it, but someone who's done a lot of standards theory work going back to IETF standards, W3C standards, XML standards, even trained some Rebel Alliance independent groups that have survived for a few decades, like microformats standards. I would like to see us bring together a similar collaborative culture. So I'm glad to be the proposed co-chair of the proposed working group at the proposed host of OpenSSF for what is a very real and very interesting group already taking shape on LinkedIn. So congrats on, I think since we last both met on this podcast, the full 100 plus members now. I think, what's the latest number now live?
Oh, it's like 115 or so on the GovOps group on LinkedIn. And that's a good place if you want to lurk and see what we're up to. The LinkedIn group is like, it's no commitment. You can just sign up and you see the GovOps spam on the feed. Hopefully more than, because LinkedIn is so mean, they don't show you anything. I think if you show up for a group, they should show the content on your feed. I'm not 100% sure about that though.
Yeah, no, while we figure out the mechanics of it, the important thing is that there is, I think, a hunger for something that captures the industry's need for the gaps that exist beyond the culture of governance, risk, and compliance paper pushing just to get more certificates. Something beyond merely doing identity governance and orchestration, making sure our joiners, movers, and leavers are out of the way. Something that in AI gives us more confidence that these agents running around on our behalf are actually using something closer to what the modernized version of least privilege is. And into this gap, I think streams of some series of folks, and that's why we learned something from everyone who's been joining up to this keyword online, in person, that there is a hunger for something here, which means that something should get created. And that something has a very practical, concrete reality. And so let's talk about that a bit more today.
Yeah, and just to give the history a bit, so I looked up the date of the blog from the Intro to GovOps blog that I guess you and I co-wrote, and the date on that was November 26th. So it's been about.
Like any good movement, I dispute the origins of it. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon on November 25th, because that was my birthday. But
Okay.
yeah, when we posted it and what LinkedIn did to the time zones, who knows? But the question,
and it was before that, because I feel like we discussed the name. I remember Andor was about ready to kill me because I refused to. I kept suggesting crazier and crazier names. And Andor was dead set against anything with trust in it, because I was attached to the idea that this was about trust, but Andor was allergic to trust. And so then we went on this whole rabbit hole of trying to figure out the new name until you actually came up with the GovOps name. Definitely a few days before November 26th. maybe on your birthday.
Well,
And but I think 6 months. I did the math. It's a little more than 6 months. To me it seems slow, but
yeah.
I guess I'm on like entrepreneur startup time, and startup time. It seems like 6 months ago we decided that yeah, there was interest in this idea. I had been publishing some blogs about a new approach um, to governance, and it was the articles on LinkedIn were getting a lot of impressions, and so it got my attention, and we started sort of coalescing around some of these core ideas.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say probably the most core idea, when we boil it down, is the centrality of capabilities versus identity. And pivoting towards the topic today, um, I feel like this is the hill that we're saying we're going to die on, and I guess.
Not the hill we're going to die on, the rock upon which I shall build my church. What is the one found, kind of one element, the either the sometimes the sand and the oyster, the thing that creates the pearl around it. Sometimes when you want to have a group, you can't just have a talking shop, in which case you have a policy discussion or you have another kind of marketing gathering and cocktail parties. But you need to have a concrete, specific, standards oriented artifact that comes up, and whether that's a file format, or a particular library, that's where a lot of the greats begin. In this case, he'll come back saying, well, why should this be after some analysis? I mean, heck, we'll also maybe talk a little bit about how we got to a proposal for this GovOps initiative that has been slimmed down so much, right? It is not done when you have included everything you need to do to get the project started. A project is ready to start when you have taken it down. There's nothing else but what is needed to get started, right? We have pruned a lot down to it, and that clarity of mind has forced the through a lot of voices. It's hardly a two-way collaboration. Mike has been synthesizing input from lots of places, but whittling it down to something which really is the bedrock foundational kernel, something we can all come around and come there. With all that buildup, let's talk about what that is.
Yeah, and so the ACC, and it's in the title. This is a list of the authorization capabilities of a domain or enterprise, let's say. But this idea that we should look at capabilities and not at identity is not new. I remember Alan Karp telling me, and Alan's been on at least twice, reiterating that this idea of capabilities of managing risk through inventorying capabilities has been around for probably 60 plus years. I don't even know if the person who thought of it is actually, if we even know who thought of it at this point. It's been so long ago. Maybe there's a couple of papers that you know about.
Yeah, it comes back to Miller and so on, but key costs and one of the and and really Anderson, one of the great writes in all of cybersecurity. The passer capability system is from '86, and that shows the idea was already around back before then. Um, the criticisms, in fact, the first criticisms that created some of the myths that we have to fight back on is from '84.
Mhm.
So I'll point everyone later on for that aspect of it too. Classic one called "Capability Myths Demolished." It's a 2001 paper by Mark Miller, a friend, and Kaping Yi, then student at Berkeley, and then later on at Google, and Jonathan Shapiro, then one of the great photographers, then out of Hopkins. And these three fellows not only went through let's talk about the history of where people got misconceptions about capabilities, what are the mathematical bases of some of these misconceptions, and what's a better way forward. And this is what led to this kind of capability-based operating system stuff. So these are, again, going back to at least the distant '80s. But let's step
Yeah.
back a second. I think for our audience, it's still a big difference. The classic authorization problem, like in the ACC, we got three words here: Authorization Capability Catalog. In traditional authorization, you've always taught the way it's traditionally textbook taught is the authorization matrix. You've got a bunch of people down one axis and a lot of things you might want to do to something on another axis, like all the different files in your file system or the lights in your house. And then you got a bunch of verbs you might have: turn on, turn off, deduct money along the way. And that matrix says basically if you got actions and resources, like a multiplication table, and then in each little cell, I got to write down who can do what. Now, that's a mess. I can refactor that and express that contents more compactly. If I said, if I list it for each person, each object and each action they have, Or I could take for each action, I could list each person and each bulb they can turn off. Or, on each bulb, I could have a little sticker hanging off the hang tag saying, here are all the people who are allowed to turn me off. And that leads to these different kinds of control lists, access control lists that are resource based or individual based, or maybe you group people. And instead of those groups, you give them functional roles. You end up with role based access control. But this entire vision of saying access control is somehow about a person, a thing, and a verb is the identity centric view. The capability oriented view brings us back to saying what we might think of as these pairs of possible sets of people and possible sets of actions on these resources. And capabilities is indeed an intentional word choice coming up right here. And then second word, right? Authorization, we understand, it's the process by which we say things are allowed or not allowed. The capabilities are the ones that allow us to reason about them in a way that we can do governance, because governance to date has often been about policing people. Identify the bad actors, try to find the people who you need to have a talk with, or some person is carrying on a compromised laptop. A lot of identity governance and administration is, have you changed your password? This is all based on that the user is the locus of possible risks. Well, as we move towards the world of AI agents, obviously they can be acting on a lot of people's behalves. It's the actions that are risky, not the actors. And as we move to that world, these capabilities might be a more native way of strengthening them. And finally, the third word is catalog, right? So we've got Authorization Capability Catalog. And that means when I have to integrate my open source system I've just downloaded with my existing posture, or it needs to call out to storing some data of like photos of the claims in Salesforce or in Workday or some other enterprise system, you're going to have points. And I know that I can always do the website through domain name system. I can go look in the .well-known files and find out how to do single sign-on. I can go crawl it if I go from robots.txt. But I don't know what catalog of things are the kinds of high risk, low risk types of capabilities in that system. And so here we put these three things together. The idea that governance as a discipline becoming something with the agility and power of DevOps, it all begins with some way to describe an existing system saying, here's what you need to know to govern me or govern it. What are the authorization things? What are those made as capabilities as you look in the resource graph? And where can I catalog it in a way that I can start making reasoning about, yep, interns don't look at production data across all these systems. For some definition of those users and some definition of those capabilities. Apologies for the monologue. I can't tell if you're dumbfounded or waiting to.
Yeah. Well, so that was an excellent overview and sort of background, I think, for people of capabilities. The only thing I'd add to that is, and I have a tendency to like go overboard on making everyone align with my jargon and way of saying things. But I'll just say
It's
it
called
anyway.
leadership, Mike. It's called leadership. The rest of us work on our followership.
So I think it's worth pointing out that in the first piece of work that we're proposing, the ACC, we really specifically say that capabilities are action resource pairs. So if you look at the model that you described, principal, action, resource, context, identity-based systems really focus on the principal, or normally a human, but could be a software entity or an organization. So, and in the capability systems, we sort of ignore the principal and say, what's the action resource? And we can actually make a list. If we have a list of all of the park requests, we can either inventory them by person or we could inventory them by action resource pair.
Mm-hmm.
And my theory has been that the action resource pair is related to risk more, is a better correlation to risk than the person is a correlation to risk. People aren't risky. It's the things that they're doing on the particular resources that have a specific business impact. That's where the risk is. And the core theory of GovOps is that by inventorying the wrong thing, we are unable to actually calculate risk. And we have to do backflips to try and, connect back into roles and then connect back to the entitlements or let's call them the capabilities in order to calculate risk.
Let me try to explain that more for our audience, and kind of quoting back from your piece about 2 weeks ago on why ACC is the foundation for GovOps. And again, to dive into some of the examples. That if you combine and pair these things and now look at them glued together as not two different Lego bricks, but itself one Lego brick. Drive a vehicle, approve a loan, open a room, a hotel room, or turn on a light. And of course, you want to think about capabilities something in pairs. Open if you're in a hotel room while you're checked in, you should be able to change the temperature in the hotel room. You should probably be able to turn on the light and turn off the light. All right, so maybe there's a bundle of these things, but fundamentally, they're talking about
But
that.
get to the roof.
Yeah, maybe not that. Right. So the constructs that we're talking about here are capabilities as the ability to do something with something. Um, and that's the risk, right? The ability to enter a hotel room is a unit of risk if it's a currently registered guest and it's their own room. And if you're, somehow because it's been 12:01 p.m. and you've got a lag in your systems and somehow someone's using an old room key, or you have to go back and check, can they find a room key and walk into someone else's hotel room? That's a problem for governance. You need to make security for your building.
Okay, so you've seen, I think you know more of this background of the history of capabilities and the challenges of convincing, or let's say, getting adoption for this mental model of thinking about capabilities versus versus identity. And I said die on this hill. Because that's the fate of most of the efforts previously. So my question is why will we not die on this hill? And why are we choosing this thing and saying this thing where everyone who's previously tried has died on this hill? Why are we going to be able to take this hill? And why is now the right time?
Well, I think mostly we're trying to use this concept of capabilities to solve a problem that's slightly sideways to it. We are less worried about um, uh, implementing a brand new operating system from scratch, from bootloader to screen, that has some of the properties you'd want out of it, which has been built successfully several times in the past in the research literature, even a few production systems. You argue that capability-based security is actually deep inside most of your bootloaders these days on modern PCs. But the idea we're trying to solve here is that let's measure the risks associated with people and actions and the system as a whole. That what we say is you cannot govern what you cannot enumerate, and what you need to govern are the risks of the wrong thing happening. And the risks were that someone other than a guest gets access to your room while you're not there. The risks might be someone drives your car without your permission, but sometimes that happens too, right? We're not here to build a system that's so super hardened that we're actually replacing how ignitions work and cars work, and that, by the way, in an emergency, someone can't borrow your keys and take a colleague to the hospital. That's why they needed to drive the car. The key for us is from governance operations is to say the capability to drive the car is what important. But it does not give you the capability to drive all cars of all the fleets, even the ones you're not certified on. So let's keep it to the question of, I think, reasons we're not going to die on this hill, because we're not trying to say everything has to change to go this way. We're just saying this is a new, more natural, basic index catalog of the things that need risk management.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I'm not actually sure we're going to die on this hill or not. We might. We might push the rock up the hill a little bit more further for the next generation. So I'm not actually 100% sure we're not going to die on this hill, but I feel like
Mike, are you sure you're in marketing? So we brought Sisyphus, we brought Hamburger Hill. I mean, I'm trying to get back on track here. Like, this is doable, right? We clearly live in a society where people take risks all the time, and we have a reasonably stable world of employee handbooks and a reasonably stable world of accountability mechanisms when people do go rogue, right? So if there is an embezzlement or so on there, we have not yet ever lived in a world in which we have AI agents running around doing compute, doing attacks so fast that even the concept of good guys and bad guys goes away, because it's just a prompt and it may error out or hallucinate in some new ways. And the threats of attacks are out there. And so now your old employee handbook said essentially, be nice to the customer, refund what's fair, don't get tricked, have a good day. And now we feel like we need to enumerate all kinds of governance guardrails that might not have been there before, like really pedantically, like, if someone purchases something with one kind of payment instrument, don't let them refund with a different one, because unless you really are sure why, right? So don't let them come in with coupons and walk out with cash, because an agent army will swarm your site and do just that. So governance is about to move into a harder area, and that's why the capabilities tool is a lens that I think helps us get a better handle on the capability risks of the next generation of governance. then continuing trying to shoehorn our model into identity-based governance or purely computer security-based data hiding, data security.
Yeah, shoehorning security into identity. That's exactly what I feel like I've been doing for the last 26 years or so.
Hmm.
I forget how long actually. Glue itself turned 17 yesterday, which I didn't announce,
Hmm.
but yeah, I guess I've been at it. I forget. I started in '98, so 28 years now. But yeah, I do feel like agentic is the thing that's basically broken the current system, where I'm seeing a proliferation of new standards for identity for software or for agents, and I see then the corresponding effort to apply least privilege and RBAC to software, and it just doesn't seem like it's up to the task. So I think you're right. It's agentic. Um, that's really like the straw that broke the camel's back, because I think we were really almost broken before with the interconnection of microservices and some of the challenges around automated reasoning.
Delegation, automation, attenuation, passing of context. The seams, the signs that we have an unstable world where we're trying to force existing identity standards to do the job of governance are kind of all around us if you look a certain way. I mean, there's also an incredible ferment this calendar year and people looking at new kinds of terminology for delegation, like mission-driven auth, or these attempts to try and bring yet the sheer number of new organizations that have proposals relevant to here. It's not just OpenID Foundation or IETF, but also the Cloud Security Alliance, OWASP. There's so many new players that are also trying to figure out what role they have to play in governing this new world of agents. So I
Yeah,
think we're at
the
a but I want to say, just as long as we have possibly a perspective, it's not a solution. We're not grabbing a hammer off the shelf and saying everything is a nail from the 1970s because of capabilities. Um, we also have other reasons for hope. The problem environment has changed a lot on us in the last year. The solutions that might be ready to be used now are changed a bit, or we're able to go further in the archives and pull out some tools. But the other reason, just so I'm going to grab the prop since I have it here, just move my mic around, so sorry for the audio quality, is that we have new hope, right? So yesterday I was at the launch of this company called Pramana, the Verification Summit. And it was about 15, 20 speakers. They had over 1,000 people to show up on an RSVP list to talk
oh
about the value of verified AI, right? That just on Monday we had a new New York Times piece that I'll put in the reading about mathematicians having some of their grad students' work get lapped by these math models that combine the power of AI and automated reasoning to solve previously unsolvable problems. We're seeing some headlines about this, from OpenAI and all as well. Well, why can't we prove things that are secure about our systems? This is where we really need to, I think, have some hope that we're creating a problem that's harder. But it was like saying, hey, IP routing back in the beginning, early days of the internet. It's like, that's going to be hard. You have to have these machines called routers. You're going to have like memory the size of unimaginable amounts to keep track of all the network connections from their peers in North America or worldwide. There's no way that could work. Well, we had to do a lot of systems engineering. And there's a reason why SIGSOFT is a busy conference every year for the last 40 years. But at least we have a new lens on the problem, a new way to go about it. So, long story short, for someone who 2-3 years ago was talking about IAM ops is, can we just quantify the headaches we're putting on that one person on Slack channel in your company who's constantly getting how can I get access to database foo? I got to go in the IAM system and add you a new permission or delegate you to this or move your database in a new folder or a new project. And they became kind of the cloud security guru. Said, can we turn that process into a request response thing? Can we help automate that? And it resembles these businesses that Gartner, identity folks would recognize. So the whole slew of acronyms, PAMs, IGAs, the IAM ops falls in that category of just taking out the daily cruft of one person has to be the expert on what keeps our configuration secure. But now we've got agents, so the volume and velocity, rapidity of those responses has picked way up. We have a real mismatch in the times that we're having to talk about security properties that span multiple properties I'm no longer asking, how can I get permission to use my company's expense reporting software? I now want to unfield an agent that's going to go fill out my expense report, and it needs to go talk to hundreds of airlines and banks and receipts and so on and put things together to send to that system. And so that surface area has increased. But also we have a new tools, right? The power of formal reasoning, formal logic. While everyone's been paying attention to LLMs and how much revolutionary work is going on in AI, there's also been a quiet but consistent revolution in good old fashioned AI that just uses logic and proofs to say, yep, you're either over your spending limit, or this is not acceptable, or you're buying stuff that's going to be, personal use, or this is going to be you approving your own expense reports, and that's not good. That are the three legs we get to in GovOps. But for today, the beginning rock that starts this chain is, if we can't enumerate what the capabilities are in this catalog, then we can't begin to use those other tools to help make a useful system and make sure, most of all, that we take the leap of moving all this governance into Git or some other version shared repository that all the other tools can use from.
Right. I should be pivoting to ACC, but I want to just pick up on something you said.
Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the example of the agent that's crossing domain boundaries. It might be calling a SaaS expense system, or even the airline, or financial institution or something. But this morning I added a white paper to the homework. I get which is not enough notice for you, because I put it on like about 15 minutes before the live stream. But I wanted to read you one section of it, and I thought it was interesting. It says, each time a request crosses the security boundary, it must be intercepted by the reference monitor, which in turn must validate the request against a security policy. No request is allowed to bypass this check. And so, and the article, it's actually, the white paper was called "Agent Security is a Systems Problem."
Mm-hmm.
Also interesting that you mentioned before the systems conference.
Yeah.
And I think this is really getting at the heart of. I have to say, this is the best paper I've read on agentic security, like, so far. I have to do a deeper read of it, but my quick read of it was that there's really a lot of like really accurate observations in this paper. But the idea, though, that we must have policy, especially when we cross trust boundaries.
Mm-hmm.
I think this really necessitates the capability approach, because the number of these of these agentic interactions just is going to so far exceed what humans will be able to monitor or reason about. And we really need to build more systems that model the type of behavior that's actually happening, that model more closely like MCP calls.
Mm-hmm.
You're calling this action, or this particular, you're asking an MCP server to do something on your expense reporting. Like, maybe the MCP server or your expense reporting system now has an MCP interface, and your agent's talking to that. And so I just see the challenges of agentic are just, they don't map well to identity-based access control.
Well, yeah, they're inhuman, and so they fail in inhuman ways, right? It's not enough that someone wants to steal your money. It's that because it's doing an expense report to an environmental conference, it decides to donate all your frequent flyer miles to charity because you should be reducing your carbon footprint. That's like out of nowhere, right? It's not something that's in the security threat model you had before. Um, but I'm impressed too. I think I'm looking at the same paper you are here too. That there's like, I attend some co-authors. It usually means a lot of collaboration, but they're also from like 6 or 7 different institutions, right?
Yeah.
They're taking awareness that we can't just plug it in as one more microservice. That an agent is not an RPC call for which we can shiv it in as one more remote web service that has to just give it a key and a password and a bearer token. It's a systemic threat to the whole system, and that needs to use the whole range of systems thinking to get back around it and make sure you can take secure use of it. So hopefully I'll put that in the follow-up reading here, but I do like any paper with a section called Human Weak Link.
Yeah. So the link to this paper is up on the notes, IOH-199. And also a link, you'll find the links to the ACC draft that were talking. All right, so let's pivot into the ACC itself.
Mhm.
It's not a very long proposal, actually. Like you said, it's pretty scoped down.
Yeah, we
I
haven't
felt,
gotten into how much we're benefiting from working within the open source security foundations, frameworks, and tools that exist, right? Building on the shoulders of
mhm.
others, the Gamara capability catalog. So maybe I'm going to pause there and play useful idiot and say, Mike, can you talk to me a little bit about, but before we dive into this, what is Gamara and its relationship to this area?
Yeah. So I have to say, I didn't think a YAML format could really be that useful, but I sort of I misread Gamara until I actually tried to use it. I think I didn't really understand it. I'm actually going to do something I don't normally do. I'm going to show an image. Let's see how this goes. Um, Normally it's dicey, but I like this image, and I know those of you on your phone won't be able to read it or listening, but I'll just describe it. On the left side, it shows a policy decision point. On the right side, it shows compliance tools. And so I think when we say that we're moving to capabilities-based access control, I think what we're also implying is that we are moving to some type of dynamic policy engine that's going to evaluate policies. We're saying that you can't just use in your code. You can have simple if-then switches for RBAC, but with policies becoming more complicated, I think that we can say that there's been a move towards policy engines. And I'm not going to say what kind of engines those are because there's no agreement on. There's a lot of different types of engines that solve different types of problems. In this diagram, I have the Cedarling, but let's just call it generic PDP, and just say that there's the sort of movement in the industry is towards PDPs for evaluating policies. On the right hand, we have compliance tools. Compliance is becoming more ops oriented, where every time we build, we want to check, we want to generate compliance reports and collect evidence. And so we want to make more. I think the idea that we want to make compliance more operational, that's already a thing. That's not our thing. We're just connecting to that movement that's already happening. But what there was really no part in the middle. Like, how do you go from the environment that's making decisions and that has the policies to the compliance engine? And that this is where Gamara, I think, filled a niche for us because it allowed us to say um, we can map the we can map the capabilities, which are a unique action resource combination, to metadata, and that metadata then can map it to the compliance where we can connect our reports. But the reason why this is important is because the compliance doesn't really has a very we have a very hard time calculating risk from the compliance, and
Mm.
so on the dynamic authorization engine, which knows about the capability, the action resource pair, we can capture all sorts of metadata about that action resource pair.
Mm.
What's the geolocation of it? Is this an Asia or a North America action resource pair? Is this what type of entities are involved in this? Is this something that humans do, or is it something that agents do? And um, so those types of, is this a healthcare or financial transaction? What's the risk of this transaction? What's the business impact? So we can start to capture a lot of that metadata, and we can do that in YAML. We don't need a fancy format for it. And so Gamara just provides a YAML format that allows to do this mapping between capabilities and then other stuff, including compliance. Um, and so I guess I'll just finish the monologue by saying, I don't know, it seems like sort of silly and trivial that a YAML format could be so important. But without this sort of connection between the dynamic authorization engine and the other infrastructure, um, we don't have the ability to build the dashboards and to generate the metrics that we need to really generate the information about risks from the raw capability information. So
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's dramatic to talk about it's just YAML, but it's also, hey, IP is just a couple of bits of header on top of the packet, right? The choices there actually do make critical differences, and what's in the YAML is what I want to talk about too, right? We had two smart comments too coming in from our listenership here. You kind of said the Beetlejuice thing, mentioned Alan Karp. Therefore, we've heard from Alan Karp, who reminds us that capabilities go back to 1958. That and and agreeing about these delegation to agents parts. So making the risks and opportunities much more vivid, and might be the opportunity for change, right? You sometimes need crisis to motivate change. You can have a good idea on the shelf for a long time without things changing. So related to that chart of Gamara, Compass, and Cedarling as examples in those three columns, as I will, of your chart, the emerging about the Authorization Capability Catalog is that it adapts the concepts we already have in place for saying, I need to do certification and do Compass compliance and produce reports that say we use segregation of duties correctly. The kinds of engineers who build the software that writes the database don't automatically get right access to our corporate sales database. The people in finance and so on who do the analysis in the database, they can do these read-only reports, but they can't tamper with or change the original sales entries and ledger work in this other set of tables. That's the hard work of governance, risk, and compliance, whether it was in the old days of, accountants coming in for the quarterly close and reviewing books and saying who's under what lock and key and what rooms are they in and who are the officers, to now the much more ultra modernized version of, what are your software settings in Salesforce and Workday and SAP, and are they correct? But the YAML file here that Gamara gives us is a way of talking about, well, and Gamara says, we're going to need these entities that you can track and use as evidence in your compliance reports. Well, in this case, the key as evidence are we need some way to slightly adapt to talk about what are the capabilities exported that some other agent or other tool can call. And that's where GovOps begins. And if I can now, instead of having to go set switches directly in the control panel of some UI to, not to pick on them like Microsoft Entra or or going and logging into my corporation's eBay account where we sell our reconditioned products, and some user has to log in as a privileged user and go set some settings on who can change prices over on eBay's control panel. All those little settings that are of relevance and that matter, how you become an admin, how you can change prices, how do you make sure that someone doesn't have a listing pointing at some counterfeit product, they need to be surfaced in a way that we can then do reasoning about. And that flat file is what I do. So, hopefully, as we begin, we're still at the very early stages of proposing ideas, building consensus. We also live in a world right now where we have AI coding assistants and so on, where we can make rapid progress in other aspects of the standards development process that used to be many, many quarters. So the next time we have this call, I expect us to be able to walk through a lot more hello worlds and some concrete examples. And that's a good thing. That means that's why we're having this conversation, to clue in our listeners even earlier in the process to what we think is going to happen here. So the catalog is going to take more concrete form soon, and we'll talk about more of the tools that operate on the catalog. But this foundational concept is one that pretty much adapts and inherits a lot of the YAML structure, grammar, and concepts right out of the Open Source Software Foundation's Jamara project, and applies it to these new AI agent governance challenges.
right.
That's why the catalog is just something that fits into your Jamara tooling.
One thing I wanted to add is that we've been talking a lot about the catalog of capabilities, but something else that the ACC has is a lexicon.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of an interesting word because I've been using schema. I'm an LDAP guy, so schema just like speaks to me. But the Jamara team came at it from a different angle, and actually I like the lexicon terminology. I think that's a good term, but I'm completely in agreement that part of the challenge here is making sure that we have a shared vocabulary in the policies, because if we don't, if we're crossing domain boundaries and I say widget and think one thing and you say widget and mean another thing, it's not going to work. So one of the challenges in cross-domain security is getting agreement on the lexicon, and so what is a resource, and how are we going to have a common vocabulary for categorizing these risks so we can build these dashboards. So I think that's another important part of the ACC. And then I just wanted to make one other observation about the chart, something I don't like. Um, the chart, that image sort of makes you think that compliance is the main, like the goal, right? And you reminded me of this expression that it really resonates, called "never let a good compliance budget go to waste." And so I think the connection to compliance is critically important, because that's the minimum level of diligence you need to show your third party partners in order for them to do business with you. So it's super important, but it's not enough. That governance is a superset. So the compliance is the minimum amount of stuff you need. Governance is governing all the risk, including your and sometimes peer-to-peer risk. So I don't know. I feel like that's and compliance itself is very control oriented, which is also not really well. It doesn't tell you a lot about risk. So you have controls and you have assessments, but how do you back from that into risk? And I feel like compliance um, it does a good job of telling you that you've met this minimum threshold. But as a CEO, if I hear I'm SOC 2, certified or whatever, it doesn't give me a warm and fuzzy feeling that I have nothing to worry about, that our company is good. And so I feel like governance helps me sleep at night because I know that I've mitigated the biggest risks that might have the biggest business impacts. But compliance itself is somehow disconnected from risk. Um,
That's actually hitting on one of the important things I want us to talk about as we wrap up, as we come towards the end of the session, which is that we've looked immediately at what is the catalog, and in some ways how modest it is and how approachable it might be. But sometimes you also want to just not focus on the ingredients, saying, here's our lovely eggs and our flour and our baking soda. Let's talk about the cakes and the cookies. And I think about the other half of your short essay introducing it, which gets back to, well, if we can use what are the things on the dashboard? What are the benefits? What's the sexy stuff? Where's the sizzle? What are the things we get that are going to be better than they were before? Because we have enough observability tools that can say, yep, I see so many expense reports being filed per day. I can see so many emails being looked up or PDF receipts being OCR'd per moment. There are hacks around that. But that's not the risks the business people need to understand and navigate the environment you're in, and do real board level decision making. So, you gave a couple examples I'd like to run through, and then we can kind of rouse on them, like geographic risk concentration. And by not just, hey, is my company's cloud estate really over indexed or vulnerable to US East 1 going down? Have I really got geographic risk in the kinds of vendors I'm using and calling on? Do I need to think about geographic risk at the geopolitical level and have privacy and other concerns elsewhere? You can start pulling up a level and doing this at higher order policies by saying, if we were reset to dealing with regulations that say all Indian payments data needs to be processed within India after 24 hours, do I have ways to move archival data at rest in this architecture over there? Do I have revenue weighted risk exposure? If I'm drowning in alerts now that says, hey, you have a supply chain vulnerability, looks like someone might have typed into something that might have weakened this LLM, and you download those weights and you use that in these processes. Maybe it's just customer service for some tiny little internal division, or it's it's doing e-commerce, but it's the employee gift shop. It's not the one that you're using on your primary external site. You need to be able to create dashboards that understand both the nature of the risks and the nature of your business. And that's where the capability catalog is the first step, but a necessary first step for returning things that talk to the board and the things that board needs to know about to govern the company, rather than talking to engineers about things that are relevant to keeping the system up and secure.
Great. That's probably a good place to leave it. And I just want to maybe spend a last second on like where we are in the process. So it took us a long time to find a home. Um, we thought we considered OWASP. OWASP, actually has projects and there's a lot of good reasons why OWASP might be a good place. We thought about maybe OpenID Foundation, but we're too identity. We didn't want to be so identity. We landed at the OpenSSF, which might be a little counterintuitive at first. But my theory is that actually the policy supply chain looks a lot like the software supply chain, that it's a different piece of software, but it's still it's a piece of software that needs to be delivered differently, but it has a lot of the same issues, and that companies are becoming software companies. That a company that used to ship boxes is now shipping a box that connects back to the manufacturer and provides services and updates and analysis, and that especially as companies implement agentic, more and more companies are actually becoming software companies. And so I think a lot of the challenges that exist in the software supply chain also exist at enterprises now. And so I think it's a good place, but it has been challenging. So we initially proposed as a work group directly under OpenSSF, and then we got introduced to the Orbit work group, which already exists under OpenSSF, and we felt that there was a lot of alignment with the Jamara project in particular, where we're using their schema. And so then we decided to form a technical initiative under the Orbit working group. And that's sort of where we are now. We've made a proposal to form this technical initiative, where we actually presented the idea for the first time very briefly on the last Orbit call. And we're sort of in the process of hoping that this is that the Orbit work group agrees that this is a good fit, and will agree to take on this technical initiative. I don't know when that happens.
No, we have to respect the process.
Fingers crossed.
As your couch-bound sidekick, Ed McMahon, I'm going to be obligatory acronym dude. Orbit, open resources for baselines, interoperability, and tooling, which again is a bit of a catch-all, but it reminds you that Orbit is a great home for this kind of discussion, because what we're trying to do is make it easier for developers of open source, but also enterprise source projects, internal things, to integrate better and get called on and get relied upon in other people's regulated systems, in other people's enterprise environments. And so those other kinds of baselines and tools include things like security scorecard and checklists that did you implement the supply chain security correctly in a way that I can take your signed certificates that this open source package is valid, and now incorporate that into the certification packaging and release processes for my own thing that I'm building with it. This is hopefully fits in a sibling effort to say, if I have policy-based controls and authorization controls for a system, where do I go find those? And then how might I build a consistent policy that does, as I said, my particular North Star is interns shouldn't be able to look at production patient data. Then how do you filter that down in a way you can set all the security settings and switches in the different packages, open and closed source, that you use to uphold that value? And again, as I said earlier, my little prop box, my individual hobby horse is that I'm hopeful that we'll be able to use automated reasoning and tools to offer a much higher level of mathematically verified assurance that you've made your governance rules translate back into the security settings and back. But even without that dream, we have a community here of people who care about these open resources for integration tooling and getting people to a certain security capability. And I'm very optimistic for our next few rounds of conversations that we will fit in well there and learn both from our existing LinkedIn group, which I close by signing on, saying please join that, to a more formal discussion group with more concrete deliverables coming up.
Right. And with that, I will actually say, if you want to find out more, you can join the GovOps LinkedIn group. Is sort of the lowest barrier. In this group, yeah, you'll get
here now, and then we'll see where we go next. But we'd be here now.
Yeah. Yeah, eventually we'll have an official mailing list and Slack channel and everything. But I don't know. I like the LinkedIn group. I think it's a place for us to discuss not just like things that we're doing, like an amendment to or a PR or something, but actual just industry news, because there's a lot of interesting industry news that's tangential to what we're saying, like this white paper that came out, for example. So I don't know. I think it's a good. We'd like more participation from. If you actually join the group, please post too. That I think it can be hopefully a many-to-many conversation. And yeah, and fingers crossed. We're looking to move it forward. We might do a GovOps like get together on at Identiverse on Wednesday at the reception at the after hours things. Like maybe I'll get a sign and we'll have a just quick get together at a table at Identiverse so we can actually meet everyone in person. And I will have GovOps buttons at Identiverse. So if you see me walking around,
I
ask me
keep
for a
looking around
button.
wanting to show you some of ours. We have this beautiful croissants too.
I forgot to bring the buttons here, but I will have buttons. They're Space Invader buttons because those were the most popular at EIC last year. Okay, let's wrap it up. I just want to announce, some of you might have noticed that this was episode 199, and the next episode's episode 200. So to mark that special occasion, I invited Eric Olden back for a live stream, and it's actually tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a weird Friday episode, and Eric just told me that that the company that he leads, Styra, was just acquired by Rubrik. I think I saw that and I saw the announcement today. So I guess we're gonna talk about AI agents, but I think we'll also ask him about Rubrik a little bit. But I'm pretty excited for another successful landing for Eric Alden of another identity company. And by the way, Eric is one of the people who inspired me to start Glue in 2009 because he had started a company called Simplified, and when I learned about them in 2009, I sort of got convinced, hey, maybe I could do this. Maybe this is possible. Maybe there's room for another IAM company out there besides Oracle and IBM and CA. Anyway, so excited to have Eric tomorrow. And look for me at Identiverse next week for your buttons. And with that, I'll say, Rohit, thank you so much for being here, your 11th appearance.
Mm-hmm.
Another classic, I'm sure.
And one of these days, I'll get a studio working and actually have lighting and a mic.
Mm-hmm.
Man.
Yeah. Yeah, I get my, I'm always pitching these things, these portable lights. They're the best. They're cheap and they go right, and they're magnetic. So with that, I'll say thank you, audience. Thank you, Rohit, again, and we'll see you next time.
And don't forget, there are other secret ingredients to a good podcast. Although this one I wouldn't recommend. Do it. Canadian gin. It smells like birch forest.
At the GovOps Summit, maybe we can sample that, which I would like to see happen maybe this year, maybe in Austin at the end of this year or something, an
Austin
actual GovOps Summit or something.
I am looking forward to that. All right.
All right, next time.
Thank you, and thank you. Shout out to Alan. Anyone else in the future wants to join in through LinkedIn? I think I'm getting the hang of how to use interactive customer viewer questions while we do this too.
Oh wait, I need to add. Alan actually said why we're not going to die on the hill this time, and he also said it's because of agents. So we're actually all in. I don't know if we're all in agreement or we're all just really hoping this is the case, or we've all come to the same conclusion. But anyway, I really hope Alan is right about this, and we will see. So okay, all right. See you next time. Thanks, everyone.